The crystalline halls of the Galactic Military Academy shimmered with an otherworldly beauty that still caught Emily Cooper off guard, even after 2 years of study. Towering ceilings stretched up 30 meters, their transparent walls refracting the light of 3 suns into rainbow cascades. It was gorgeous, peaceful, and entirely alien, much like the beings who had built it. Cadet Cooper. The harsh voice of Instructor Zexivek cut through her momentary reverie. Since you find the architecture so fascinating, perhaps you'd care to explain why your species' primitive approach to siege warfare would fail so spectacularly in modern combat. Emily's jaw clenched. The Varsidian instructor's 4 eyes blinked in synchronized condescension, his crystalline exoskeleton catching the light in a way that was probably meant to be intimidating. She'd gotten used to the prejudice, the constant reminders that humans were just Deathworlders. But today something inside her snapped. "With respect, instructor," Emily replied, rising from her seat with the deliberate slowness her mother had taught her when dealing with spooked horses back home. "I believe you're underestimating Earth's military heritage." A ripple of chittering laughter spread through the classroom. Her fellow cadets, a mix of species from across the galaxy, seemed to find the very notion amusing. Only Marcus Rodriguez and Aisha Patel, the other 2 humans in the class, remained silent, their expressions a mixture of concern and solidarity. Heritage. The Zexivek's translator rendered his scoff perfectly. "Your species barely mastered spaceflight a century ago. The siege of Cathera simulation has stumped our finest strategists for millennia. The fastest completion time is 94 years of simulation time, achieved by arch-strategist Viklan himself." Emily felt her lips curl into what her dad would have called her snake-killing smile. "Then you won't mind if we try it." The laughter stopped. Even Zexivek's bioluminescent patterns faltered for a moment. "You want to attempt the Cathera simulation?" The instructor's translator struggled to convey his mixture of disbelief and amusement. "The same simulation that has broken the minds of our greatest military thinkers." "Yes, sir." Emily stood straighter, channeling every bit of that Texas stubbornness that had gotten her through the Academy's brutal physical training. "In fact, I bet we can solve it faster than 94 years." The classroom erupted in a cacophony of alien vocalizations. Marcus and Aisha were on their feet now too, flanking her without hesitation. Emily caught Marcus mouthing, "What are you doing?" But she kept her eyes locked on Zexivek. The instructor's crystalline form shimmered with what Emily had learned to recognize as barely contained mirth. "Very well, Cadet Cooper. You and your fellow humans may attempt the simulation. When you fail, and you will fail, perhaps you'll finally understand why Deathworlders need to learn their place in modern warfare. And when we succeed," Emily's voice carried the same steel she'd heard in her mother's whenever someone suggested the Cooper Ranch was too big for a woman to manage. "If you somehow manage to complete the simulation at all, let alone faster than 94 years, I'll personally recommend all 3 of you for advanced tactical training." Zexivek's translator crackled with barely contained derision. "You have 3 days to prepare." Dismissed. As the other cadets filed out, many still chittering with laughter, Emily felt Marcus and Aisha's eyes on her. "Tell me you have a plan," Aisha whispered, her family's generations of military service evident in her controlled tone. Emily's smile widened. "Back home, we had a saying. Sometimes you've got to let them think you're the dumb cow in the pasture, right up until you show them the horns." "I hope those horns of yours are sharp," Marcus muttered, "because we just volunteered to take on the most notorious military simulation in galactic history." "Trust me," Emily replied, already pulling up historical archives on her neural interface. "They won't know what hit them." The Academy's simulation archive was deserted at 300 hours, its holographic displays casting an eerie blue glow across the trio's faces. They'd been at it for hours, poring over every scrap of data about the Cathera simulation they could access. "This is insane," Marcus muttered, running a hand through his close-cropped hair. His father, a veteran of Brazilian special forces, had taught him to always study the battlefield. But this was different. The defending force is outnumbered 20-1, trapped on a high-gravity planet, with limited resources and that's exactly why we're going to win, Emily interrupted, her eyes gleaming with the same intensity she'd shown in the classroom. The holographic display before her showed countless failed attempts by various species to solve the simulation. Look at what they all did wrong. Aisha leaned forward, her sharp features illuminated by the tactical overlay. 7 generations of her family had served in various military branches, and something about the display caught her trained eye. They're all following the same doctrine. Every single attempt. Exactly. Emily's fingers danced through the holographic interface, pulling up image after image of defensive formations. Shield walls, static fortifications, conventional siege tactics that haven't changed in 10,000 years of galactic warfare. Marcus stood up, stretching muscles still sore from the Academy's high-gravity training. Because they work. They've always worked. For them. Emily's smile had that dangerous edge again. But we're not them. We're Deathworlders, remember. Our entire history is written in unconventional warfare. She pulled up a new set of files. Earth military history. Images flashed by. Ancient Roman armies, medieval castle sieges, modern urban warfare scenarios. While they were perfecting their energy shields, our ancestors were figuring out how to survive against overwhelming odds. The Battle of Thermopylae, Aisha whispered, recognition dawning in her eyes. The Siege of Masada, the Winter War. Exactly. And what do they all have in common? Emily's question hung in the air. Marcus's eyes widened. Terrain advantage, using the environment itself as a weapon. And what's the one thing every alien species in this simulation ignored? Emily zoomed in on Cathera's planetary data. They all complained about the high gravity, the toxic atmosphere pockets, the unstable geology. Because those are death sentences for most species, Aisha finished, catching on. But for us, it's just another Tuesday. Emily's grin was infectious. We grew up on a death world. Our bodies can handle things that would kill most species. And more importantly, we think differently. Marcus was already running calculations. If we used the toxic zones as cover, and the high-gravity areas for ambush points. Now you're thinking like a Deathworlder. Emily pulled up the simulation's command interface. But that's just the start. What's the one thing none of these alien commanders ever tried? Aisha studied the failed strategies. They never gave up territory voluntarily. They always tried to hold everything. Because retreat is shameful in their cultures, Emily nodded. But what did Sun Tzu say about appearing weak when you are strong? The next few hours flew by as they planned, argued, and refined their strategy. They pulled from every era of human warfare. Guerrilla tactics from liberation movements, psychological warfare from modern doctrine, even ancient hunting strategies from their prehistoric ancestors. As the first sun began to rise, casting long shadows through the archive's crystalline walls, Marcus looked at their final battle plan with a mixture of awe and concern. This is either going to be the most brilliant strategy in Academy history, or will fail so spectacularly they'll talk about it for generations. Aisha finished, but she was smiling. Emily stood up, stretching her tired muscles. Either way, we're about to show them why underestimating humans is always a mistake. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we make history. As they left the archive, none of them noticed Instructor Zexivek watching from the shadows, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with what might have been concern. The simulation chamber was a perfect sphere of seamless black metal, 30 meters in diameter. As Emily, Marcus, and Aisha took their positions in the neural interface pods, the observation gallery above filled with spectators. Word had spread fast about the Deathworlders challenge. Neural synchronization in 3, 2, 1. The technician's voice faded as reality dissolved around them. They materialized in the command center of Cathera Prime's main fortress. Through the panoramic windows, they could see the planet's harsh landscape. A world of jagged mountains and deep ravines under perpetual twilight from its dying sun. In orbit, the enemy fleet was already beginning its descent, thousands of ships darkening the purple sky. "Home, sweet home," Emily muttered, noting how the chamber's 2.3 g gravity felt almost comfortable after 2 years of academy training. Their alien classmates would have been struggling to move. "Enemy forces deploying," Marcus reported, his hands dancing over the holographic display. 20,000 ships, 4 million ground troops, standard hegemony attack formation. He paused. "They're following the textbook exactly." "Of course they are," Aisha said, already accessing the fortress's communication systems. They'd had 10,000 years to perfect their doctrine. Why change it? Emily smiled, remembering countless games of chess with her grandfather. Because perfect patterns become perfect predictability. Execute Phase 1. Across the fortress, klaxons began to wail. The defensive shield grid, the pride of Cathera's protection, and the cornerstone of every previous attempt at the simulation, began to flicker and die. In the observation gallery, gasps of shock rippled through the audience. Instructor Zexivek's crystalline form vibrated with what might have been outrage or disbelief. "Multiple shield generators experiencing critical failures," Marcus announced, suppressing a grin. "Defensive grid collapse in 3, 2, 1. The massive energy shields that had protected Cathera's fortress for 1,000 simulated years winked out of existence. The attacking forces, presented with such an obvious victory condition, did exactly what Emily had predicted. They rushed forward to claim their prize. "They're deploying ground forces," Aisha reported. "All units advancing on the fortress. They're celebrating already." "Orbital bombardment?" Emily asked, though she already knew the answer. "Negative. They want to capture the fortress intact, just like the doctrine demands." Marcus shook his head. "They really don't suspect anything." Emily accessed the fortress's internal systems, initiating sequences that would have seemed insane to any conventional commander. Defensive turrets powered down. Blast doors opened. The fortress itself seemed to be surrendering. "Phase 2 on your mark," Aisha said, her fingers hovering over the controls. Through the windows, they could see the enemy's front line approaching the outer walls. Millions of troops moving in perfect formation, their energy shields creating a rippling blue wave across the landscape. It was beautiful, orderly, and completely vulnerable. "You know what my grandpa always said about putting all your eggs in one basket?" Emily asked, watching the enemy advance. "It only works if you know for sure nobody's waiting to flip the basket." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. 2 years of being underestimated, of being called primitive, of being treated like some fascinating but ultimately inferior species, had led to this. Execute Phase 2. The fortress's fusion reactors, which had been cycling down in an apparent surrender, suddenly redlined. But instead of exploding, they channeled their power into something the simulation's creators had never considered: the planet itself. Deep beneath the advancing army, carefully planted gravitic charges activated. The unstable geology that had been considered a disadvantage became a weapon. Entire sections of the battlefield began to collapse, not randomly, but in precisely calculated patterns. "My God," someone in the observation gallery whispered. "They're weaponizing the planet." Emily watched as the perfect formation of the enemy army shattered. "Now," she said quietly, "we show them how Deathworlders fight." Execute Phase 3. The real battle was about to begin. Chaos erupted in the observation gallery as the simulation unfolded. Instructor Zexivek moved to terminate the program, his crystalline appendages reaching for the emergency override. "Sir," the chief technician intercepted him. "Their neural patterns are stable. They know exactly what they're doing." Below, the battlefield had transformed into something out of Earth's prehistoric past. Massive fissures split the ground, creating a labyrinth of canyons and pitfalls. The enemy's perfect formation had fractured into isolated groups, their communication systems struggling to coordinate across the shifting terrain. 40% of our territory is lost, Marcus reported, but his tone carried no concern. Enemy forces are advancing into the designated zones. Emily nodded, watching the tactical display with the same calm focus she used when herding cattle through treacherous ravines. How are those geological readings looking? Pockets of toxic gas are rising exactly where we predicted. Marcus's fingers danced across the holographic controls. The high-gravity wells are forming perfectly. They think we've lost control of the planet's infrastructure. In the primary attack corridor, the enemy commander was directing his forces to secure what he thought was abandoned territory. His troops moved with practiced precision, securing each sector according to 10,000 years of tactical doctrine. They're taking our bait, Aisha reported, monitoring the enemy's communications. Their command structure is celebrating. They think. She paused, allowing herself a small smile. They think we're panicking. Status of our hidden units? Emily asked, though the tactical display already showed her what she needed to know. All in position. The enemy hasn't spotted a single one. They're so focused on their textbook advance that they're not even looking for ambush positions. Marcus shook his head. They really don't think we're capable of this level of deception. Above them, the observation gallery had fallen into stunned silence. The alien cadets who had been laughing at the humans' apparent incompetence were now watching with growing unease as the battlefield transformed into something they'd never seen before. Phase 3 is complete, Aisha announced. Enemy forces are now divided into the predicted isolation zones. Their command and control networks are fragmenting exactly as planned. Emily stood up from her command station, walking to the panoramic window. In the distance, she could see the enemy's advanced units moving into what they thought was secured territory. They had no idea they were walking into positions that had been prepared long before they arrived. You know what the biggest mistake in siege warfare is? She asked, though her question wasn't really directed at her teammates. It's thinking that warfare hasn't evolved since the first wall was built. She turned back to her station, pulling up the next set of commands. Our ancestors didn't just build walls. They learned to use every advantage, every terrain feature, every quirk of physics and biology to survive. And now, the tactical display lit up with new information. Hidden bunkers powered up. Concealed weapon systems came online. 2 years of academy training in advanced technology combined with millions of years of evolutionary survival instincts were about to be unleashed. Now we show them why Earth's predators evolved to be so dangerous, Marcus finished, his hands poised over the controls. In the observation gallery, instructors' exhibits bioluminescent patterns had shifted to a frequency that indicated deep disturbance. The simulation's parameters were being met. Technically, no rules were being broken. But this was warfare unlike anything in the historical records. Execute final phase, Emily commanded, her voice carrying the weight of every human who had ever been underestimated. Let's show them what Deathworlders can really do. The next few minutes would rewrite every tactical manual in the Galactic Military Academy. The real question wasn't whether they would win. It was whether the galaxy was ready for what they were about to demonstrate. The first sign that something was terribly wrong for the invasion force came when their forward units encountered the toxic zones. According to every sensor reading, these areas should have been lethal, pockets of atmosphere so corrosive that even sealed battle armor couldn't survive. Then human soldiers emerged from the gas like ghosts. 3rd Division reporting successful ambush, Marcus announced, watching as the tactical display lit up with confirmation after confirmation. Our troops are using the toxic environment exactly as planned. Enemy forces are completely disoriented. In the simulation, their soldiers, specially equipped and trained to operate in conditions that would kill most species, moved through the poisonous clouds as if they were morning mist. The enemy's advanced sensors, calibrated for conventional warfare, couldn't distinguish human biosignatures through the toxic interference. Breaking their command structure, Aisha reported, her hands flying over the communication arrays. Implementing Operation Banshee. Through the enemy's comm channels, they began broadcasting sounds that their research had shown were particularly distressing to the attacking species: human laughter, children's nursery rhymes, and songs that had been carefully chosen to exploit alien auditory sensitivities. Emily watched as confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. Status on the gravity traps. Perfect, Marcus grinned. They're still thinking in 2 dimensions. They have no idea we've... A massive section of the battlefield suddenly inverted. Areas that had registered as dangerously high gravity became zero-G zones, while previously normal regions compressed into crushing gravity wells. The enemy formations, already fragmented, shattered completely. In the observation gallery, the alien cadets watched in horror as their most basic assumptions about warfare were systematically destroyed. Instructor Zexivek's crystalline form had stopped shimmering entirely, a sign of intense concentration or shock. "This is impossible," one of the observers whispered. "They're using environmental hazards as weapons. They're moving through lethal zones. They're fighting like Deathworlders." "Exactly," Emily muttered, though only her teammates could hear her. "We're not fighting like you. We're fighting like us." On the tactical display, the full scope of their strategy became clear. The retreats had been carefully planned herding movements. The abandoned territories were killing grounds. Every environmental hazard that had stymied previous attempts at the simulation had been transformed into a tactical advantage. "Enemy command structure is collapsing," Aisha reported with professional satisfaction. "Their doctrine requires consensus from 5 levels of command for any tactical deviation. They literally cannot adapt fast enough to what we're doing." Marcus pulled up a new set of readings. "High-gravity assault teams are in position. Permission to execute Operation Gravity Well." Emily nodded. "Do it." In the lethal high-gravity zones, human troops began emerging from hidden bunkers. While their enemies struggled to move under the crushing force, the Deathworlder soldiers, products of a high-gravity world and 2 years of brutal academy training, moved with practiced ease. "This isn't warfare," someone in the gallery protested. This is savage." Emily's voice carried clearly through the command center. "No, this is survival. This is what happens when you evolve on a world that tries to kill you every day. You learn to use everything as a weapon, even the things that should kill you." The tactical display continued to update as more enemy units found themselves trapped, disoriented, or simply unable to cope with warfare that defied every principle of their doctrine. The carefully coordinated siege had devolved into exactly the kind of chaotic environmental warfare that humans had mastered over millennia of fighting on their death world. "Final phase is ready," Marcus announced. "All units in position." Emily stood at the command station, her posture reflecting generations of humans who had faced overwhelming odds and found ways to prevail. "Initialize Operation Thunderstrike. Let's end this." Above them, the observation gallery had fallen into stunned silence. They were about to witness the completion of a century-long simulation in mere minutes, and nothing in their tactical doctrine could explain how. Operation Thunderstrike began not with the expected roar of weapons, but with silence. Complete, absolute silence. "All communication systems offline," Aisha confirmed, her fingers dancing across the controls. "Enemy forces are completely isolated. No command structure, no tactical updates, no sensory data sharing." In the simulation, 4 million of the galaxy's finest troops suddenly found themselves fighting blind. Their sophisticated neural networks, designed to share targeting data and tactical updates across entire armies, had gone dark. For species that relied on collective decision-making, it was paralyzing. "Now," Emily commanded, her voice carrying the steel of generations of Texas ranchers who'd faced down everything from tornadoes to corporate takeovers. "Show them what lone wolves can do." Marcus initiated the attack sequence. Across the battlefield, human forces emerged from their hidden positions. Unlike their enemies, they didn't need constant neural updates or command consensus. Each unit had been briefed on the overall strategy, but was free to adapt as needed, a concept so foreign to the galactic military that they'd never defended against it. "Sir," the chief technician in the observation gallery called out to Instructor HFY. "They're neural patterns. They're not linked in a command network. Each soldier is thinking independently." "Impossible," the HFY's translator crackled. "No military force can function without unified tactical consciousness." But the evidence was playing out before them. Human troops moved with what appeared to be chaos, but was actually coordinated independence, each unit adapting to local conditions without waiting for hierarchical approval. "Second phase of Thunderstrike commencing," Marcus reported. "Deploying sonic disruptors." The battlefield erupted with sound, but not the expected weapons fire. Instead, human battle cries echoed across the terrain. War whoops that had once rung out across Earth's ancient battlefields, berserker screams that had struck terror into enemies for millennia, and the modern battle cries of Earth's most feared military units, all blended into a psychological weapon that no alien defense could counter. "Enemy forces are breaking formation," Aisha announced, unable to hide her satisfaction. "Their neural patterns can't handle the emotional overload. They've never encountered this kind of psychological warfare." Emily watched as the tactical display showed enemy units fracturing, breaking away from their perfect formations. "They thought we were primitive because we still feel strong emotions," she said quietly. They never considered that emotions could be a weapon. In the observation gallery, alien cadets watched in horror as the supposedly inferior Deathworlders demonstrated warfare on a level they'd never imagined. Human troops moved through toxic zones, leaped through varying gravity fields, and fought with an intensity that their species had evolved over millions of years of survival on Earth. "Multiple enemy units attempting to surrender," Marcus reported. "Others are trying to retreat, but they can't achieve consensus without their command network." "Show them mercy," Emily ordered. "Demonstrate that Deathworlders understand more than just violence." The human forces began accepting surrenders with efficient professionalism, another concept that confused the enemy. In their doctrine, surrender was a complex diplomatic process requiring multiple levels of approval. The humans simply offered it immediately to any enemy who asked. Simulation time elapsed. 18 minutes. 42 seconds. Aisha announced, her voice thick with pride. "Impossible," someone in the gallery shouted. "The fastest completion time is 94 years. "Only if you fight by your rules," Emily replied, loud enough for the observers to hear. "We fought by Earth's rules. Adapt, improvise, overcome. Use every advantage, no matter how unconventional." And most importantly, she turned to face the gallery directly. Never underestimate a species that evolved to survive on a death world. The simulation wasn't quite over, but victory was now inevitable. In less than 20 minutes, 3 human cadets had proven that sometimes the most primitive approach was the most effective. They hadn't just beaten the simulation, they had rewritten the very definition of tactical warfare. "Final enemy units are surrendering," Marcus confirmed. "Should we begin cleanup operations?" Emily nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Let's show them that humans know how to win with grace." Simulation complete. Total elapsed time, 19 minutes and 13 seconds. The artificial black walls of the simulation chamber faded back into view as the neural interfaces disconnected. Emily, Marcus, and Aisha stood from their pods to face a gallery that had doubled in size during their brief but historic victory. Complete silence filled the chamber. Even the Academy's ever-present crystalline hum seemed muted, as if the building itself was processing what it had just witnessed. Instructor HFY moved first, his crystalline form catching the light in complex patterns that the humans had learned to recognize as intense emotional states. In 10,000 years of military education, his translator crackled, "No one has ever approached the simulation this way." "That's because everyone tried to fight like galactic citizens," Emily replied, standing straight despite the physical drain of the neural interface. We fought like humans. The data screens around the chamber told the story in stark numbers. Enemy casualties, 12%. Civilian casualties, 0%. Infrastructure damage, 17%. Territory lost, 0%. Time elapsed, 1913. Impossible, one of the senior instructors muttered. The previous record holder lost 60% of the civilian population, just holding out for 94 years. How did you? We adapted, Marcus explained, pulling up the battle data. Every environmental hazard you saw as a disadvantage, we saw as an asset. High-gravity zones became ambush points. Toxic areas became cover. Unstable terrain became a weapon. Alicia stepped forward, her voice carrying the professional authority of her family's military legacy. More importantly, we didn't try to match your technological advantages. We used what humans do best. We improvised, we fought dirty, and we never gave up. The tactical playback showed the full scope of their victory. Enemy units surrendering en masse, their perfect formations shattered by warfare they couldn't comprehend. Civilians safely evacuated through routes that other species had deemed unsurvivable. A complete victory achieved in less time than it took to eat lunch. But the psychological warfare, another instructor protested. The independent unit actions, the emotional manipulation. These aren't advanced tactical concepts. Emily couldn't help but smile. No, they're not advanced. They're primitive. They're the same techniques our ancestors used to survive on Earth. We didn't win because we were technologically superior. We won because we never forgot what it means to fight for survival. The gallery erupted in discussion, dozens of species trying to process how their most fundamental military doctrines had just been upended by 3 primitive Deathworlders. The human cadets are correct. This HFY's voice cut through the chaos. His crystalline form had shifted to a configuration that Emily had never seen before. We have spent millennia perfecting warfare through technology and doctrine. They reminded us that combat is ultimately about survival, something their species knows better than most. He turned to face the 3 humans directly. As promised, you will all receive recommendations for advanced tactical training. Moreover, his translator paused, as if struggling to convey the proper tone. I believe the Academy's curriculum may require significant revision. Sir, Emily asked, hearing the unspoken question in his voice. We would be honored if you would assist in developing a new course. This HFY's crystalline surface rippled with what might have been respect. Perhaps it's time the galaxy learned what Deathworlders can teach us about survival. As the gallery began to clear, Marcus leaned close to Emily. Think they'll ever look at humans the same way again? Emily watched as a group of alien cadets approached, their body language showing curiosity rather than the usual condescension. No, she smiled. I think we just changed everything. And in the years to come, when new cadets arrived at the Academy, they would learn about the day 3 humans rewrote the rules of galactic warfare, not with advanced technology or complex doctrine, but with the simple, primitive, unstoppable drive to survive that had made humanity a force to be reckoned with. 1 month after the historic simulation, the Grand Hall of the Galactic Military Academy hosted its first ever Deathworlder Combat Doctrine Symposium. The massive crystalline amphitheater, usually reserved for graduation ceremonies, was packed with military leaders from across the galaxy. Emily stood at the podium, flanked by Marcus and Aisha, facing an audience that had once dismissed their species as primitive warriors. Now those same beings leaned forward in their seats, data crystals ready to record every word. The fundamental mistake, Emily began, her voice carrying clearly through the translator matrix, wasn't in underestimating humans. It was in assuming that advanced civilization meant abandoning the lessons learned through evolution. The tactical display behind her showed snippets from their legendary simulation run, now required viewing for all Academy cadets. What you saw as primitive survival instincts, Marcus continued, stepping forward, we recognized as tactical advantages refined over millions of years. Every species in this room evolved from survivors, but somewhere along the way, you forgot what that meant. Aisha activated a new display, showing Earth's various military histories. Our planet taught us that survival isn't about having the best technology or the most refined doctrine. It's about adaptation, improvisation, and the willingness to use everything at your disposal. In the front row, Instructor HFY's crystalline form glowed with approval. The past month had seen him become one of the strongest advocates for incorporating human tactical thinking into the Academy's curriculum. But perhaps the most important lesson, Emily continued, isn't about combat at all. It's about perspective. She paused, making eye contact with various beings in the audience. Every single one of you comes from a species that survived countless challenges to reach the stars. You all have Deathworlder instincts buried in your genetic memory. The hall fell silent as the implications sank in. Species that had long since moved past their evolutionary crucibles began to remember what their ancestors had endured to give them life. That's why, starting next term, Marcus announced, the Academy will offer a new required course, Evolutionary Tactical Theory. Not just human combat doctrine, but a study of how every species' evolutionary history can inform their military strategies. Aisha stepped forward. Because the greatest strength isn't in forgetting your primitive past, it's in remembering that every advance, every technology, every doctrine should build upon the foundation that survival already gave you. The presentation concluded with a new simulation demonstration. This time, it showed mixed species units applying both advanced technology and evolutionary advantages. The results were beyond anything the Academy had thought possible. As the audience filed out, many stopping to share their own species' forgotten survival tactics, Emily felt a familiar crystalline presence behind her. You've started something remarkable, Instructor HFY said, his translator conveying genuine warmth. The Academy Board has voted to create a permanent position, Chair of Evolutionary Combat Studies. We would be honored if you would consider it after graduation. Emily smiled, thinking of that day in class that had started it all. Thank you, sir, but I think this needs to be bigger than just one human perspective. She gestured to where groups of cadets, human and alien alike, were already excitedly discussing their species' evolutionary advantages. You're right, of course. HFY's crystal structure shimmered with amusement. You usually are, about these things. As they watched the grand hall slowly empty, Marcus and Aisha joined them. The three humans who had changed galactic military doctrine forever stood together, watching the future unfold. You know what this means, right? Marcus grinned. Every single combat simulation in the Academy database will need to be rebuilt. Good, Emily replied, her eyes sparkling with that same determination that had carried them through the Cathera simulation. Because if there's one thing Deathworlders know how to do, it's build something new from the ashes of the old. And in the years that followed, as the galaxy's military forces transformed into something that combined the best of advanced civilization and evolutionary wisdom, people would remember the day 3 human cadets proved that sometimes the oldest lessons were the most valuable of all.